Audience, welcome to Viewpoint from Overseas. I am your host, Misbah Azam. With me today, a special guest. Well, he's not a special guest, I would say. He used to be with us, but due to his personal engagements, for a long time, he did not join the Viewpoint from Overseas. So I have with me, one of my guests is our own Mr. Sabahat Ashraf. Hello, Sabahat. Welcome back to... And as you know, our own Mr. Riaz Haq. So today we are going to discuss something very much related to Pakistan politics and something going on there about their democracy. So Riaz, let me start from you. Democracy march continues in Pakistan. This is consecutive second democratic government which is going to take power. However, people have a lot of concerns. Oh, this has not happened. Election will be postponed. How do you see all that, Riaz?
So I think if we look at the bigger picture, we know that this is the second time since 2008 that a parliament has completed its term, 5-year term. And there's a new interim government in place, a caretaker government, which is a neutral setup specifically to hold election. The elections are scheduled for July 25, 2018. So the things are moving in the right direction. Now, of course, there are all kinds of issues, but if you simply go by the headlines, you'd think that things are terrible. So I think the better thing to do is to look at the trend line. You know, there's a saying, this was by Bill Clinton. He once said that, don't go by the headlines, look at the trend lines. So I believe in Pakistan, the headlines are not good, usually not good, but the trend lines are certainly positive. So I'm very happy to see, in spite of all of the problems, in spite of all of the issues that the country has, the challenges, we've had security issues, we've had economic issues, we've had major terrorism issues in the country. In spite of all of that, the march for democracy, march toward a better democracy continues, although the road is rough, but it's not stopping the march.
So, Riaz, just a little bit explain to our audience, because we have a lot of international audience which may not know about Pakistan's political dynamics there. Why it is happening that always when we had a Senate, they had a Senate elections, there was a say, oh, there will be no Senate elections. Then parliamentary election, there will be nothing happening. So why people are so skeptical, and even educated people, the media, why they are doing that?
I think part of it is that media wants to just stir up controversy, make up stuff, just to get people interested in watching the news. And there are people, the pundits and commentators, who are always ready to make some of the worst forecasts. Let me just tell you something very interesting that I saw. Just last week, I happened to come by on a study that was done by the Rand Corporation. It was in summer of 1999, and the study was about Asia, about what's going to happen in Asia. And that study forecast that Pakistan disappears by 2015.
Rand Corporation said.
Rand Corporation. Pakistan disappears by 2015. So this is the kind of talk that a lot of the international community has been trying to promote, particularly the United States. One of the things I found in that study was that two of its key authors, particularly those who wrote about South Asia, were Indians. One of them is Ashley Tellis, who is still regarded very highly as a scholar on South Asia. and he continues to do his business as usual now. Instead of Rand, now he's with, I think, with Brookings Institution.
So this
and
is
the other fellow is also very active right now. His name is Rajan Menon. So I think this is the kind of stuff that you hear, and the Pakistani media picks it up, the international media picks it up, they play these headlines. You know, and this is not the only one. I mean, then in 2009, we saw David Kulkarni make the forecast that what we're seeing now, this is
you're talking about
when the Taliban
Australian,
took over SWAT.
You're talking about Dr. Kulkarni.
Yeah, Kulkarni used to work for George Bush. He was George W. Bush's.
He was hired by Condoleezza Rice.
Close aide.
That's correct.
About the Afghanistan conflict.
That's correct.
And he very confidently predicted that what we're seeing now is the unraveling of the Pakistani state. And within the 6 to 9 months, the state will collapse.
I see.
So we're used to these kinds of forecasts. They come all the time. And the similar forecasts are made about our democracy, about elections, about what's going on in terms of political processes. But so far, the Pakistanis have actually done it. But they're a resilient people. You know, we have a lot of challenges. Pakistanis have a lot of challenges. But they've faced the challenges, and they've actually defied a lot of these, dire predictions about the country.
Sabat, how you see it, all the movement of democracy, then, you know, all these troubles, you know, like as Riaz mentioned, how you see it?
Well, I'm really glad Riaz brought up those points, and we are talking about it from the aspect of democracy actually improving and evolving. Because the way I see it, and if you remember, or people have watched our previous programs, the ones in Urdu and English, Pakistan and a number of these democracies, their challenge has been to evolve out of that cycle of military dictatorship and authoritarian rule and all of that. And folks might remember, or that argument we used to make when Zardari was president, a lot of people would say, oh, Zardari this, Zardari that. That was the early stages of this new cycle of democracy. And the point people like me were always raising was, we have to let the system evolve. We have to, like democracy and good governance, will come out of a process of evolution. And as Riaz was saying, now we finally are at a point where for the first time, and we used to say this last time, that the elections were the first time one democratic dispensation, meaning an election, an elected government, completed its natural term. And now we're actually coming now to 2 cycles. So that just shows that it is starting to take root. And a lot of the problems that we are seeing now are actually, the way I look at it, they are, you know, now we can't even say they are birth pangs. They're actually the pangs of maturity. Things are coming up. You are seeing people challenging, as I think you were saying in an earlier discussion, people are challenging their political parties. They're bringing out these things. These are, and you know, if you take a step back and look at it, these are, as we say in the US, these are good problems to have. It's good to have the problem of worrying about which party is less democratic and which one should be giving tickets to who. No one is talking about that democracy is not here to stay. That's the big change. Now, what happens beyond that is evolution. It'll happen. It'll take a few cycles. And I seem to remember saying this myself a few years ago, that it's going to take a few cycles for the wheat to separate from the chaff and the engine to get running and improving. And this first generation of leaders who were the ones fighting to put democracy back into place, but they're all very flawed. They're all flawed. I mean, we talk about, you know, you talk about one, people say, are you supporting the other? No. From the PPP's leadership to the PMLN to even Imran Khan himself to the smaller parties, the MQM and this and that, it's flawed leadership. And frankly, when you go through decades and decades of authoritarian rule, all you get coming out of that system are flawed individuals. They are people that have survived. They've had to do whatever it takes to survive. And the other problem was, when earlier dispensations, we were never sure they would last so long. So you get this crop of politicians who would come in and try to say that, you know, make as much money as you can while you're here because you don't know how long you will last. all of those things now should slowly, and people, like in the US, we are always talking about US presidents worrying about their legacy, about how history will see them, how they will look like down the road. And I don't think we are there yet, but that will be the next thing to watch for, to see whether people like Imran Khan or Shehbaz Sharif or Nawaz Sharif can start taking that really long view. To see whether they can start behaving like statesmen.
Turning to a statesman instead of politician.
Exactly.
You are basically trying to say that. Yes, how you see that? I mean, if you look into your experience, you write, you just read a lot. When this is going to happen, when the politicians will be turning to a statesman?
I think it will not happen instantaneously. It will
maybe
not happen quickly.
Lives.
It may not even happen in our lifetimes. But there are forces that will push them in that direction. Let me give you an example. One of the things that happened recently, it came to light, when they passed the 2017 Election Act of 2017, which is for this particular election, the parliament, and this passed almost unanimously, with a lot of votes for this election act. They removed a lot of the requirements for declaring assets. They removed columns for whether they've paid taxes or not. If they've paid taxes, how much taxes have they paid? Whether or not they have been paying their bills, electric bills, utility bills, et cetera, et cetera. This was all in the papers earlier, before the 2017 election law that they passed. Then they had questions about the ICAMA. So this was disclosure, basically. It didn't say that, if you just say yes to this, you're going to be disqualified. All it said was...
Declare it.
Declare. Just let us know. Okay? What they did was they removed everything, but fortunately, although it took a while, people finally saw when they saw the nomination papers coming out, they saw all these columns were missing. So a bunch of people raised hell. And then some people went to the court. And the Supreme Court ordered that all these declarations have to be made. Whether they're in the form or not, you still have to make those declarations.
They do it on
they have to sign an affidavit.
That's true.
So that's a good thing. Disclosure and transparency are important parts of democracy. People have a right to know who they're electing. So that's number one. The second thing that is happening, and that is a problem, obviously, is that we're seeing all the same things that have happened in the past election. They're basically giving their tickets to the electables. People who are a known quantity, who have had basically one prior election. They're powerful, resourceful people in their particular constituencies, and they have a very high chance of winning if they get nominated by a certain party, or even if they don't get nominated. So all these parties are rushing to recruit these electables. And some of the people who have actually made sacrifices for these parties being ignored for democracy. Now, one of the problems with this whole picture is because the parties in Pakistan don't have any internal democracy. Like in the United States, Democratic Party cannot decide who to give tickets to. The party leadership does not have that power. Anybody who wants to get the nomination to run for democracy has to go through primary elections. So the power does not belong to the Democratic Party leaders. That power belongs to the people who decide, registered Democrats decide who they're going to have as their candidates. In Pakistan, that power is in the hands of a few people, particularly the way parties are run. That power is basically held by, just the top guy, in each party. Like Imran Khan has all the power. In the case of, Nawaz Sharif and Shehbaz Sharif, they have all the power. So that is a problem. Now, the good thing is that a lot of the people are challenging these practices. There is a challenge from within these parties. They're saying, well, what about us? Why aren't you giving us the opportunity to run? Now, the problem when you only give tickets to electables, there's a couple of big problems with it. One problem is that it discourages a lot of very capable people from wanting to run in the election. They say, hey, nothing is going to change. Why bother? They're not going to give us the tickets. We have no opportunity. The other problem is that it also discourages a lot of the voters from coming out and participating in the election. So the election turnout in Pakistan is very low, actually. It's in the 40s.
Yes, sometimes even less.
So you have to broaden the base. You have to appeal to more people. And that will not happen unless people feel some confidence that their vote will count, that when they vote, there will be a change. It's not going to be the same old faces that get elected over and over again.
Yeah. So, Sabat, electable politics, right? So, how you see it that, I have this theory that if the people one time, just stand up and say we are not going to vote for the turncoats, anybody who changed their party affiliations just because they saw somebody is going to win, we are not going to vote them. Do you think until that happens, nothing will change? This electable politics will be there?
See, again, we were discussing earlier about evolution, right? So to say that nothing will change, it goes back to that old thing that the system, as it creaks through, will try various options, right? I was just listening to the various things we've been talking about: disclosure, turnout, how candidates are determined. Back in Pakistan, we call it giving tickets to run. All of these are issues of the evolution of democracy, right? And frankly, we often, those of us who come from, even living in the West, those of us who come from Pakistan and other places that have been deprived of a working democracy, often talk as if democracy is this one perfect thing and we just need to be like it. Not really. Look at the US. Even this last election cycle, all of these issues were issues.
That's true.
The fact of how the Democratic Party picked its candidate, a lot of people think was not very democratic. Yeah. That's the issue of internal democracy in a party. Then there's the matter of disclosure. Mr. Donald Trump still hasn't revealed his tax returns, which is something in the US, it turns out it's not a legal requirement. It was just a convention. And so on. So these are all things of a democratic culture. Right? None of these were legal requirements in the US either. But they're a matter of convention and culture. And as we evolve, Pakistan will develop its own conventions and its own culture of democracy, right? How tickets are given in the US, we have a primary system. We forget that the primary system has not always been there. It has only been around barely 30, 40 years.
Exactly.
Before that, in the time of Nixon and all of that, it was, proverbially speaking, a few old white men in cigar-filled rooms.
In a Chicago smoking room of Chicago.
Right,
correct.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so these things will evolve. And as Riyaz Saab was saying, we are seeing that develop in front of our eyes. People are doing things. In fact, the PTI is an interesting example, and they're going through that process. People decry it. I've decried the PTI in a lot of bad decisions. But you notice that, for example, there was that a picture going around of Imran Khan meeting one person and then the other person, and then there's a lot of hue and cry over the next 2 days.
Yeah.
And he put it back, and the tickets were revoked. And all of that is working itself out. Coming back to your question about when will this end? Well, it will go forward slowly and steadily, and as I think you were saying, we're getting to the point where the people will make that decision. Some parties will pick turncoats and electables, quote unquote. Other parties might, or in some places we will find principal candidates, and some will win, some will lose, and hopefully by the next cycle, the parties will see that if electables don't work, then they will stop making that decision.
Exactly.
If good candidates work, they will start making. So, and by the way, I'm not saying that is a given. We might still have electables winning. And if the electables keep winning, then why shouldn't the parties pick them? And that's going to be a problem. One of the most interesting arguments I heard about, I was actually arguing with someone about why did Imran Khan pick these electables and all of that. Very interesting argument a friend of mine made, where he said, listen, you are worried, and you're talking about me, that the PTI, a strong part of the PTI's coalition is right-wing people, is religious,
Religious right, that's correct.
religious right-wing, or
Religious right,
I'm trying not to use very strong words,
that's
but
true.
that's the point. And the only way to balance them out within the party is to have these people who are coming from the conventional parties. Now, I don't think I completely buy that argument, but it's an interesting argument to make. That maybe as they evolve and they take on, because again, there's also a matter of competency. We talk about Donald Trump never had elective office or things like that. They do need people who know how to make things run, how to make the trains work on time. So that is another aspect, right? So if they're taking on these people with experience in governance and all of these things have to work out. And corruption, yes, everyone's, as we say in Urdu, is hammam mein sab nange hain. We have people with, ain't nobody perfect in this bathhouse, right?
Yes, it's a politics. It's a brutal politics.
And in this case, even worse than normal. I mean, you saw what happened in Egypt, right? Egypt had the first election. Pakistan has had cycles of democracy and authoritarianism. Egypt had one long cycle of authoritarianism, and then they had an election after like 7. But think about this: they had an election after 80 years, right? A real election. And in that situation, the only organized force left was the Islamic Brotherhood. Ikhwan al-Muslimin, Muslim Brotherhood.
Muslim Brotherhood.
And therefore, they were able to take on, they were able to stand and win. But the problem then became, because of that drought of 80 years, outside the army, there was no one who knew what to do with government or how to run elections and all of that. So, we will have to develop these things as we go, and all of these problems we are naming are good problems to have. We have to, and it's not going to end, right? Just like in the US, we thought we had all this sorted out about disclosure, about party tickets and the primary system, and about the evolution and tax. And now suddenly everything's in question again. So these things, democracy is it's a messy process. It will happen, and hopefully it will take its away from there.
Yes, let me ask you this. Some time ago, the new Chief Minister of Punjab, Mr. Dr. Hassan Askari Rizvi, I heard him saying something very interesting. He said, long time ago, like 10, 15 years ago, he said that political parties become democratic as the democracy in the country evolve more and more. How do you see this
I think
theory?
Democracy is really a process. It's not one particular endpoint. And that process is an evolving process. Things change over time. But one thing that is absolutely essential for things to change, particularly things to change in the positive direction, is that more and more people get interested, more and more people participate, and they push things. For example, they demand that this electable idea is not a good idea.
Not a good idea.
Because if you have the same people getting elected over and over again, they will preserve the status quo. They will make laws that favor the status quo. They will not change anything fundamentally. So they have to make demands. They have to, sometimes you have to make, we come out on the streets, or go protest outside the big political leaders' homes, like people are doing in Banigala, or some people are doing in Punjab against Hamza Shahbaz. Yeah. So I think those things have to happen. That's necessary. If people stop protesting, if people stop pushing for change, nothing will change.
Nothing will change. It will stay same. Just we have 2-3 minutes left.
That is actually a basic principle of democracy everywhere. There's a story, a legend that is in U.S. politics that is told about, I think, FDR and also Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, that someone came to him, I think it was FDR, they came to him and talked about, I think it was civil rights, and they said, made the passionate case for the whole thing. And the president turned around and said, I agree with everything you said. Now go out and make me do it.
Make me do it.
So that make me do it point is what Riyaz Saab's talking about. But I think we're going to, just like the politicians and the parties need to evolve, the voters and the body politic also needs to evolve, right? They have to start understanding and knowing their power, feeling their power. knowing what they can and can't do. Even right now, just before I came, a friend of mine from Canada was saying, but in this system, only the parties matter, people don't matter. We have to have people learn what they can do and how to make it happen.
Riyaz, you have to add something?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And there are people, there are not just the political parties. I think the media has to play a role. The education system has to play a role. They have to go out and tell people, hey, come out and vote. Even if you don't like these candidates, vote. Because that's how things are going to change. If you don't like the electables, make sure that they lose the election. So that in future, this preference for electability goes away.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you heard my panelists, and I do agree with Riyaz's comment that democracy has to evolve. I mean, democracy is not something that we impose on top. I mean, it has to go. We cannot say that since I am not having a clean water and also it means democracy has a problem, because if there is no democracy, then what? I mean, that is the question always asked. Democracy may not be a perfect system, but it is the only system which works, and especially in the diverse country like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and these countries. So this was for our show for this week, and keep watching Viewpoint from Overseas. I am your host, Misbah Azam.